Hello. I'm going to share an invite just in case. Boom. Invite shared. And I have not been paying attention to the internet for quite a while, a week or two. And that changes today. All right, so I'm going to present the present. And okay, so I'm just going to catch up. I'm going to play catch up. You're welcome to play with me. Let's see. So Lenny, he's got something coming up. And Osa Sunday, Griswold Grimm, the Friday Morning Nameless, Michael Makes Meta Modern Connections. Got some music. I don't know if they would complain to this channel. I bet that's good. I haven't watched that. I think that Manuel does a good job. He did a good job when he spoke with Paul Vanderklay and Tayo, so this could be good. Let's click it. I think Manuel has a gift. Let's see.
Relationships, like what does it mean to be in relation? Like what are the options within a relation? And we were just talking about the angles from which you can approach that. And like Luke and I have a different style, so that might actually contribute or detract from the conversation. So we'll find that out. So yeah, Luke, like what is a relation?
Okay, well, what's interesting is before we started, you said you like to start out with definitions, and like one of my shticks is that no one understands anything through definitions. So but I love it. I'm willing to roll with this. The way I would say it, I don't know that I can give a clear, succinct definition. It takes me a while to work there, but I see relationships as, I think one of the best ways to understand them is they are fields of seeming opposites, somewhat. I almost think of them as
Andrew.
a Venn diagram.
How's it going, Gavin?
Doing all right? Have some time. Man, that's pretty fun. How are you doing, Andrew?
Good. Getting breakfast.
Breakfast. Do you do education during the summers?
Yep.
I hear you.
What are we looking at?
Well, I haven't been paying attention to the internet in general until today. It's been a while. I've been fasting, I guess. And so I know that Manuel, I liked his conversation with Paul Vanderklay and his conversation with Tayo. And so I just went to my home feed or the subscriptions. I don't know which one it was. And this looked like it could be good because I think Manuel, he can do a good job speaking with people.
I've never heard of Manuel.
He was I think him and Mark Lefevre, they've done some work together, some collaboration, and but he's a different personality than Mark for sure. So what have you been paying attention to?
Mostly Father Stephen stuff, you know.
Oh, mostly what?
Father Stephen stuff.
Father Stephen?
Yeah.
What's he talking about?
and whatnot. Oh, there's my breakfast.
Okay.
Thank you.
I may add water.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Noahides.
Yeah. Does that ring a bell for you? Or?
Yeah, it does. It does ring a bell. Let me pull it up. The 7 Noahide laws. Let's see.
Should probably learn more about it.
There,
think-
Chabad. And then let's, I'm going to share screen. Cool. I'm rusty. Let's see.
It's a good sign.
And yeah, the 7 Noahide laws on the Chabad website. Do not profane God's oneness in any way. Do not curse your creator. Do not murder. Do not eat a limb of a still living animal. Do not steal. Harness and channel the human libido. Establish courts of law and ensure justice in our world.
Yep.
The strangest one is eating a limb of a still living animal.
Yeah, seems really particular.
I guess this was a problem, right?
Yeah.
It kind of, I mean, it points
so
at how
no-
sometimes this stuff is contextual. Maybe there was a problem at some point.
So no Korean octopi.
What's
that's
that?
insane. No Korean octopi. You know how like Korean restaurants will sometimes serve like octopi and they're like still living. You know?
Okay.
Can't eat that.
Yeah, I think I've heard Jacob talk about it as well. Like, there may have been some other practices, besides octopus.
I can
So
live with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how you been?
Pretty good. Let's see. My big thing recently has been the mind reading instrument and real political science. That's been my big thing. And I'm being a father and a husband and an employee. So.
Just on the side.
Well, there's the internet personality. On the internet, I shout out certain things on the internet, but yeah. And the outside of the internet, I go collect pine straw and do landscaping and go jogging and take the boat out on the water. Try to be a husband and a father.
Yeah.
So what was Father Stephen's? Did he share anything that was worth mentioning, or is it just kind of something you trying?
So the latest thing was talking more about Paul, and there's some other good tidbits in there. Let's see. There's this one line you've probably heard of, like. He who knew no sin became as sin for us. Something like that.
I have not heard of that.
Yeah,
He who knew no sin became as sin for us.
Yeah. Father Stephen pointed out that that's a bad translation. Should be something like a sin offering. And then all the Jewish folks got real excited about that because it was like some sort of wordplay in Hebrew. But yeah. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting that I've been reading. I've been going back through Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Oh yeah.
And I'm on Rule 3. I just got done with Rule 3, and I think I've been trying to write. So this is the second time I've been through it, and I've been trying to write like a commentary on this one. I tried to condense Rule 3 and like reword it for myself, and I reworded it as. So Jordan Peterson said, make friends with people who want the best for you. And then I reworded it to be make friends with the saints and know it will be uncomfortable to be in the presence of one who walks with God. So, you know, it's Jordan Peterson talked about how it was once Adam and Eve's eyes were open, they then covered themselves, and it has something to do with being ashamed. And I think there's something to that. Like maybe the person who knows no sin is can make you very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then often those people will either be, well, there's all kinds of things that can happen to those people. If you hear about them in history, it's usually because they were martyred, or because maybe the people in power have tried to like use them for their own purposes. I think those are two ways that the saints get used. I know that Chad put something out today about the saints compared to, like, I think it was the cult of the the public education system, focusing more on, I think in his mind he knew more about the dinosaurs than he knew about the saints, and so I think this is connected.
Did he put it on his Substack?
No, he didn't. He might have, but he did a YouTube video.
Okay. Yeah, I just saw his little documentary he made a while back, which looked pretty good. So.
But yeah, that may have been a year ago or more. Yeah. Well,
yeah, I'm still waiting for the Justin Wells documentary.
I heard about that.
Yeah, I've got to have some way of explaining whatever the heck this is.
Yeah. But let's see. I wrote a paragraph after rule 1. I said at the end, it says basically rule 1 is stand up straight with your shoulders back. It seems like Jordan Peterson is kind of a character that connects a lot of us in this little corner.
Yeah.
But it seems like, it said, standing up straight with your shoulders back. Let's see. People controlled by their minds have learned a new trick thanks to Jordan. This trick improves their lives and the lives of people around them. I believe that is true and good. I also believe it isn't all true and all good because I aim for creating heaven on earth. And that requires that we not fool ourselves and others by merely acting like we are a top lobster. We need to become one, and that requires avoiding being too defensive. That requires that we become someone who can take on extreme discomfort, including the discomfort of losing our power and status based on illusion of being a top lobster. It's only when we become willing and able to sacrifice these trappings that we truly become the top lobster who is willing to wash other people's feet and serve God. So you got to find someone and rub their feet. I don't know. Have you ever rubbed a foot before?
Nope. My own foot.
Yeah.
That's about it.
I don't know how you get into that. I know how I got into it, but if I were to try to imagine myself in your situation, yeah, I don't know. There's the Crowder has the sign that said "Change my mind." You could sit out on campus and say "Free foot rubs." But yeah, I feel like there's people who have learned some very important first steps from Jordan Peterson who are in the corner. But what else are we doing? I don't know.
Watching Father Stephen, that's what I'm doing.
Is it making your life better?
I hope so. It's interesting. I mean, heck,
Yeah, I mean, that's what I feel like on in the internet. well, I guess so. My theory on this whole mind reading instrument thing is that we are all slaves to our mind, like every human has been, and so and we will seek comfort, we'll avoid discomfort. That's what the mind does naturally. And so what we're doing on the internet is we're kind of doing that. Like we're enslaved to minds that are playing games, having fun, finding out what's interesting, and that's mostly what's happening on the internet, including the people in this little corner. So you find it interesting, right? Your mind finds it interesting.
Yeah, okay. I gotta resist the mind control. I'm gonna eat my breakfast. I'll see you later, Gavin. It's been interesting talking to you.
All right, Andrew. Enjoy your food, man.
Thanks.
All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
day, man.
You too. Bye-bye. All right. Let's go back and listen to some more Manuel and Luke. So I think Luke had just said he doesn't think we can have understanding through definitions. And he was beginning to talk about relations or relationships. And y'all are welcome to hop in. Let's see, relations. Click, 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 click. It's funny just stopping these videos and looking at the, the picture.
Relationships are these different fields of varying degrees of overlapping patterns. Fields of, I don't know that I can give a clear, succinct definition. It takes me a while to work there, but I see relationships as, I think one of the best ways to understand them is they are fields of seeming opposites, somewhat. I almost think of them as like a Venn diagram. I often think that what relationships are these different fields of varying degrees of overlapping patterns. And so a relationship like your and I relationship, to make it more practical and simple, would be definitely centered around this little corner, centered around Paul. I'm trying to think. First times I probably interacted with you were Bridges of Meaning. I don't know that I interacted with you before Bridges of Meaning. And then, everybody gets different little spheres in which they participate, the corners of the corners. And so we have a relationship is any degree of, let's see, time, energy, attention spent engaging and participating in some common love would maybe be the broadest way to define a relationship.
Let me butt in. So I had the thought that, you have enemies, you have friends, you have strangers. So there's these different kinds of relationships, and they are, I'd say one of the important points is goals. Do we have similar goals? And so he mentioned Paul Vanderklay. So similar, we have some goal. A lot of us have some interest or goal to pay attention to Paul Vanderklay, and that somehow connects us. And then there's conflicts of interest, but I'll just add more. It's related to love, if you're calling love the thing that attracts the attention, but then you can have cross purposes and different goals. That's what I call an enemy, is people who have a conflict of interest. And I recently defined a friend as someone who will play with you, and then a stranger as people who, in order to not be a stranger, the two people have to know each other's names. That was a simple definition I came up with. So I try to be careful about giving attention to strangers. But yeah.
right? So a couple of things stood out to me, right? So you were talking about that it's centered around something, right? Um, so I responded to you in a YouTube comment, right? Like that the centering around something is what gives meaning to the love, right? So so there that's what unifies and gives shared experience, right? Like so I agree with the centering, and the center can change, right? Like it doesn't have to be one center. Um, because I can play tennis with you and I can have a conversation, and like they're not centered around the same uh, thing, unless we do both of these things in service to something higher, right? But that's kind of a cheat there.
Right. Well, like in a friendship, there's many different subspecies of ways that you can participate and interact, and then there's probably a common center to all the different subspecies, which
Well,
would be the
hopefully,
highest thing.
if you're an integrated person,
Yeah.
that is true. But like, there's, I think, plenty of people that don't have that.
Yeah. No, I do think that's some degree of integration, because because truly, I guess from my perspective, that would be actually loving the person of which all the subspecies are participating in, rather than using the person in some kind of uh, transactional way. Like I'm
Hmm.
using you for, I don't know. I think of, I had a friend. He became a friend, but when I was really young, Nintendo had just come out, right?
Yeah.
And my family would not let us get a Nintendo for the longest time, but I had a friend who had a Nintendo, and so we became friends because I wanted to go to his house and play Nintendo all the time. But that was a very I think we became friends throughout the entirety of our relationship, but that's an example of at least to a pretty significant degree transactional thing. Like I wanted to play his Nintendo, right?
So Luke mentions loving the person. He's connecting that with befriending, and like for me, loving a person has to do with being able to communicate, listening to another person. That's essential. And there are blockers. There are things that prevent us from communicating. And so, in order to communicate, we have to actually understand how other people view the world, which can include their definitions. It includes their worldview and their identity. It includes their history, their subconscious, so many things. And so, yeah, um, it's not. Yeah, his language, Luke's language is difficult for me to understand. But I haven't really had a conversation with Luke. I don't think that would help. I think being able to ask questions to really dig deep and try to understand what they mean. But maybe that's what Manuel's doing here.
Hmm. Does that make it lesser, or like? 'Cause-
Well, so the way that I would understand even that though is, I don't know. I was talking about this recently. I think in any interaction that we have with another person, there are areas of overlap and connection and unity in this interaction, and there are levels of disunity and disharmony, order and chaos, or whatever. And it depends on whatever you want to focus on in that particular interaction. Will really, I'm not saying it's going to dictate, but it will highly influence how both people experience that interaction. So, like for
Mhm.
example, like I tend to be a lot more disagreeable with people where I have a lot more commonality.
Mhm.
Like if we have a ton of overlap, I'll tend to probably lean into the disagreement, or the disunity, or the distinctions between us, rather than all the things we have in common. Because I'm just like, well, we don't
Because
need
there's something that can hold the tension.
Yeah, for sure. And to me, I'm like, we don't need to work on that. We already agree. Like, I don't think we need to go around patting each other on the back about stuff that we agree on. Like, let's work on the stuff that's
The
um,
contrast.
yes. Whereas, like, because so like a perfect example in this little corner to even make it more practical would be like I think I've always gotten along relatively well with you and Mark, but you and Mark are very the way that we discuss and the way that we approach things and the way that we think about stuff tends to be pretty different. But
Mhm.
I know I know I would say know is the right word. I know and I have faith that there is common unity in us that you have that I have. I mean, I believe that fundamentally because I don't believe in because I believe human beings are good. I believe we're made in the image of God. You know,
Being is good,
huh?
and like I would say, being is good, and human beings participate in being, so they inherit the goodness of being.
Yeah, I came across this idea very recently that just breathing. Every time we take a breath, we are participating in the life-giving force, which is God, that which creates and sustains everything. And so, like, that's the reason all humans are good, is because, like, all living creatures are good, is because we're breathing. Some creatures are breathing in the CO2, depending on how you define creatures. But life, like all of life, is participating. But yeah, human is participating, and we do other things. I could be vulgar, but I will not be vulgar on this channel. But we eat, we drink, and then things come out, and then we also we have a drive to create life with many of us do have created 3 children, and so when we do these things, the eating, drinking, and what comes out of the body because of that, and then the procreation with your spouse, and we do that, and we breathe. This is all participating in the life-giving force, and it's good. Um, Very good, not just good. And Genesis 1, I want to point out at the very end of Genesis 1, there's a mention of very good. And so sometimes things are just so, and sometimes things are good, and sometimes things are very good. So we all have that in common.
And
Yes.
they can choose not to. Like that's the problem.
Yes, they can choose not to, but I have a faith that in any person, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that anyone that I can relate to, anyone who has being, anyone who's participating in being,
Mhm.
has something that you can connect to if you have eyes to see, no matter where they're at, no matter how far gone or whatever judgment you want to make of them, of how twisted they've gotten that being. There's unity there to be had, to be agape into existence, to lean into, to love. And so the further
Mhm.
that someone is from me, I almost take it as like a
Challenge.
personal challenge. Yeah, I'm just like, we're gonna like we'll connect. And and I have a pretty radical faith that that can happen. And I think it's um I don't know, it gets at pretty fundamental assumptions in the way that I see things because it's, these little Lukeisms I like to quote all the time, but it's Lewis, what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are. You can interact with someone who's very different from you and be the kind of person and be standing in the kind of place where, let's say, your enemy is your friend. Like where there are no more enemies, where you can actually love your enemy because you are endlessly opening to give of yourself to bridge the gap, to mediate the difference, I guess is the way that I would say it.
Mhm.
Rather than needing to, and this gets into like validation, like what you and Mark were talking about the other day, rather than this libidinal need to constantly need, and I like a lot of affirmation. So like this is I do like it, but like I don't um
You're doing well, Luke.
well, thank you. I don't it almost seems to me to be you're not a very integrated person if you need the kind of security of having tons of people around you that affirm your self identity all the time.
I would distinguish there between validation, right? Because validation is a statement of truth,
Mm,
and affirmation, which is like a reinforcement of an emotional state more so, right?
yeah.
So I want to challenge you a little bit because
Okay.
the word
Before that, it's interesting that Manuel pointed out validation versus affirmation in light of back the last time I was paying attention to the corner was people talking about being affirming. So that's interesting. Validation versus affirmation. So let's listen to Manuel.
that came up for me is hypocrisy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so let's just state that yes, because we're both part of reality, right? Like there's always something that is shared and that can be appealed to, right? Like I don't want to challenge that
Yeah.
axiom necessarily, right? But then the the question at a certain point is, right, like it's the elephant in the room, right? Like at a certain point you're ignoring the elephant in the room, and at, that turns into hypocrisy. Would you agree with that?
So what's the elephant that you're ignoring that then becomes
Well, the
hypocrisy?
disagreement, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to. I don't think that it's necessarily ignoring it. Like that would be hypocrisy, I think. If there's something uh, so what would be the
I mean, it's interesting that we're trying to like talk about the words. Like I don't like when there's a disagreement over definitions. I mean, I know it's hard to try to juggle the other person's definitions, like, and refine the model of that person in your mind and their definitions. It's hard to do that, and it's nice if we all use the same definitions. But I think the point there, no matter how you define it, is that we will avoid conflict and avoid disagreement, and we haven't learned how to disagree with each other well. It happens, and yeah, the person who's trying to be the top lobster, who's not just acting like a top lobster, is is someone who is not too defensive, who will um, seek out feedback from others and an attempt um, to do better. This is why you need to be a top lobster instead of acting like a top lobster. And these disagreements, they're very valuable. They can be. They can be very valuable. So let's hear it.
I may be misunderstanding you, but what would be the difference between hypocrisy and self-control? Because there may be something that keeps coming up in my consciousness that I'm observing, whether it's that I'm focusing on, whether it's the disagreement, and then you may ignore that. That could be self-discipline,
right.
or it could be hypocrisy.
Yeah, but there's a distinction between you relating to yourself, right? Because I might ignore things in this conversation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there's me.
It's not that I might ignore things. It's that that's actually what we do all the time. We are ignoring an infinite number of things, and when we focus our attention, it's like, whew, we ignore so much. That's what our minds do, is ignore, and we can't avoid it. We are blind. Our minds are blind and ignoring. It's a feature, and if we're blind to the fact that our minds are blind, then um, you know that might be one of those elephants.
Relating to you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why I use the example elephant in the room is because it's significant, right? Like the elephant is salient, it's
Mm-hmm.
significant, right? And then when you don't recognize the elephant, right, then you're in some sense not in reality, right? Like you're tolerating the ignoring of existence.
So I guess this, I don't know. I would say that this gets at discernment because there may be, depending on both the
I'll just point out, like, my mind had this, and then I saw that Manuel's in the chat, and hey, Manuel, I'm glad you're here. And which means that my attention was split, and so I apologize, Manuel, if I didn't catch everything you said there. And then if I go back and listen to you one more time, which I'll do, the audience might not like it, but this is real time.
personal.
When you don't recognize the elephant, right? Then you're in some sense not in reality, right? Like you're tolerating the ignoring of existence.
Yeah, but I think we have to get comfortable with the fact that we're always ignoring reality. Like, it's unavoidable. Our ignorance is unavoidable. And then others may want to point at the elephant, and the question is how is the relevance? Ultimately, how relevant is that elephant? So, and then some things are more relevant, than others, depending on each person and their goals. But yeah, I'm not saying that. I don't know if Emmanuel would agree or disagree with me there, but yeah, that's how I see it. We can't help but be ignorant and blind about most things. But that's why having people provide feedback about the elephant can be very valuable. And it's great if, like, I want software. I built a Gavin Palmer bot, and I wanted to install it in a bunch of these Discord servers because I can, one of the projects I'm interested in is being able to take all that information and feed it through a filter in order to filter to identify signals and filter out noise based on what would be relevant to me. And so, ideally the feedback that we receive is relevant.
So I guess I don't know. I would say that this gets at discernment because there may be, depending on both the personal / individual, I'm meaning just like the person, which is never by themselves. That's always a hard distinction to make. I try to be careful in my language between person and individual because whatever. I don't want to go down that road. But
it is important. I agree.
It is important. But so a person may notice something and see something and be focused on something, which may or may not be legitimate. Like it could be their own weakness or disintegration of why they're focused on that thing. So there's that component of it where the person.
Well, I think focus actually necessarily has that component, right? Yeah. Because you focus on something because you need to deal with it, right? Which means that there's an insufficiency, a lack, a problem, like unless you worship or
yes,
unless
but you could be disintegrated in a way where let's say like you're a hypochondriac.
I didn't catch that part about the unless there. Yeah, I think you said unless you worship it or unless you denigrate it. And so I do know that I've focused, like I've gone into, for the Bible, for example, when my more immature mind state, and would be like not even attempting to listen to God, or just not being very good at listening and just wanting to talk and to share my ideas and think that I'm got it figured out or something. And so I'm focusing on all the things that look like a problem or that look like a contradiction or something that's wrong. Yeah. And so in my less integrated state, my attention was focused on something that, it wasn't an attempt to try and love and listen to an author or to another. It wasn't an attempt to try to learn. It was me being arrogant. I still do it. I mean, I try to notice. I think I'm definitely better at noticing it now, but Yeah, I'm not. I would be curious where you were going to go with that. Let me just peek. I'm talking about intentional ignoring to pursue something. There is relevance and perceived relevance. That's the problem with these things. That's why I'm talking about an elephant, because the elephant will affect things even if ignored. Yeah, there's a question of agency as well. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And if you can point out the elephant, I guess at some point you might make an assumption about what is relevant. And so, for example, I've been going through Jordan Peterson's rules, and and hi Chad, I saw you in the comment, but I don't mean to be rude. But yeah, rule 3 I just finished this morning: make friends with people who want the best for you. And the question is what is the best for you, right? And so when you try to point at that elephant, you're kind of making an assumption about what's best for you. And so you may be right, you may be wrong. But yeah, it's and I know one of my problems is I can overwhelm people pointing at all kinds of elephants. I built a slide for my boss. My boss said, put 30 minutes on my calendar, and I spent like an entire day creating a slide, a presentation with a table of contents, and gave that to him, and then scheduled an appointment with him. It's like, I don't know what's relevant, but I can overwhelm people with elephants that are going to have an influence. The number of things that affect are infinite. So some are more relevant than others. And it's hard. That's one of my struggles. Sometimes it's hard to decide on which thing is most relevant. It's hard to prioritize. Manuel, the problem is that if you lack capacity to participate, you cannot just ignore that. Yeah, you cannot ignore that, because then you cannot learn. Right. That what discipline is for. If you don't discipline, they'll end up lost. I feel like you're speaking about being a father as well there, about discipline. Oh, I hear mine. And I smell food cooking. Let's see. I'm doing many things here. I'm responsible for making sure that if there is a fire, I respond quickly. As an employee and as a father and a husband. And so we all have different capacity to learn, Manuel. And this is one of the things, like, I'm into information technology, and one of my criticisms for a lot of people have been related to people's ability to receive feedback, to which Jacob, correctly would say there is such thing as a denial of service attack. And so, I could put out so much information that I could overwhelm, for example, my children. I could overwhelm them with information, and so prioritizing and picking what's most relevant is a skill as well. But yeah, you need to learn. I think, and then there's a pitch in there. The pitch is, I know something about using information technology in order to be able to handle feedback at scale. That kind of technology is going to continue to evolve and grow in our world. It's going to have a lot of impact. That's the stuff I'm interested in. The technology that is available for us to help us.
Or something. You could be hyper focused on something that's an illusion.
Right.
Or that you should not be focused on.
Yes, that's most people.
Right. And so and there's the personal component of it, and then there's like cultural components of it, because I think
Mhm.
like just take America where I am, there are people that I would say both at the personal level and then at the collective group level that are very focused on things that I think are distracting them from their actual problems.
Mhm.
You know,
I think one important thing here, because Emmanuel said most people, I think what's really important is our goals. It's our goals, our worldview. So, like, I could say that I have a goal of creating the kingdom of heaven on earth and walking with God. And, one of those is kind of here and now. Creating the kingdom of heaven on earth is, for me, it can mean here and now, but it can also mean something like 1,000 years from now where nobody has sickness or disease. And, you know, you can connect all of that together and you can see all the paths by which that goal is accomplished. And now someone else might have a different worldview with different goals, and they might believe that there's going to be some kind of miracle that happens outside of the work of humans. And so when people believe that something outside of human participation is going to create the kingdom of heaven on earth, for example, and then they will be tempted to not participate. And so my ideas are irrelevant to them. Similarly, there's people who believe things have already happened. There's all kinds of beliefs which can our beliefs and our goals are kind of like they bind and blind us. They're super powerful. And so you ultimately have to be able to reconsider those. Like the elephant is hiding around the corner because of our beliefs. And sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. We're just taking some of our first steps along a path. And when you start to take your first steps, as a father, you can look at your children, you can see all the stages of development, and sometimes you can hold their hand when they're learning to walk. There will be stumbling, and you don't laugh at them when they stumble. You don't, and you don't like say, "Look at me, I know how to walk without stumbling." So, and you don't point at all the ones that are stumbling and make fun of them or discourage them or anything. So it's tough. Let's see, Manuel. Yes, it doesn't mean that what you do will fix anything, and it also doesn't tell you what to do. I'm just making the point. You have a responsibility. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, I think we should take on responsibility. Like I wrote something this morning. Is it's this is in response to make friends with people who want what's best for you. I said, what's best for you? Well, we can identify some things that are not best for you, but only God knows what's best for you. If you ignore God, you will suffer. And if you seek to walk with God, you will suffer. You're going to suffer either way, but one is more meaningful than the other. So, but yeah, walking with God, taking on responsibility, for sure. Let's encourage it.
and exacerbating their own problems probably. And so I am all I'm trying to say is that in any interaction with a person where there's agreement and disagreement, there's unity and there's distinction, there's commonality, and then there's things that are different. Which of those you focus on and why is all is not necessarily something that I think can be formalized and prescribed.
No, that's a consequence of value, right? And what you value is in some sense informed by what you deem possible.
Yeah, it's also a consequence of love and maturity. I mean, it's kind of like there's this artist that I really like who His name's Noah Gunderson, and he's coming to town. And so he had this lyric though I was listening to because I'm trying to just listen to a lot of music before he shows up, and he has this line in it that's something like, "If I'd have told you then what you could have been, would you even would you have essentially like would you have listened?"
Mhm.
And it's this, and it's very similar to a lot of these little pithy statements that I love all the time, like you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink, or what you see and hear. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I think a lot of that is like you can. This is where I think wisdom comes in, and love and holiness. The whole like fruit of the spirit from Galatians 5. I was just looking at this morning because it's in Paul's Twitter tagline. Equipping people for things against which there is no law. The fruit of the spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those things, which are somewhat generic, transcendental things, they are transcendent and immanent because they're real things. It's like love. It's something that we all know and experience, and you can point to particulars of it, but it's also bigger than any of those particulars can reduce.
I just want to mention that I had a revelation recently about too little and too much. But even those gifts of the Holy Spirit, I think you can have too little or too much of those as well. And so you could imagine someone being too gentle and too patient, right? It's like, if you're blocking the line as there's a fire in the building, so you kind of have to balance all of these things out. And so I just had to toss that in. There's kind of this revelation, like there's always, with everything, there's the right amount. You can have too little or too much of basically anything, including the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And I didn't know that a year ago, for example.
So like when you are interacting with someone, all that fruit of the spirit stuff is going to be it's going to be bridging the gap for anyone who's participating in being in a way where, because here's the thing, you can sit there. This is my concern. I'm circling around this thing, is that someone can be so hyper focused on a mode of disagreement, and it's kind of like the person you're interacting with is incapable of seeing the thing that you're trying to point out. So even if you're right, it doesn't matter.
Right, I agree.
Which is the whole, like, that's why I say you can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right.
Yeah, pearls
It
before
doesn't
swine.
necessarily matter.
Yeah, pearls before swine. That's that, right? And then they turn
Yes.
around and trample you. Like, yeah.
Yes, but then there's also the problem of this is the thing, is most people think the thing that they're saying is right, and they resort to the pearls before swine. Most people don't have the humility and the impulse to think, maybe I'm the swine.
Yeah, the thing is I don't think anyone is completely right. Like, yeah. So that impulse to think that we're right, or to judge something as good or bad, that's very dangerous. To judge it as right or wrong, true or false, like it's very dangerous to go down that route. There's always trade-offs. So, yeah, and I know that one's going to go over a lot of people's heads. So, sorry. Well, let me check in on the comments here. Nope, no feedback yet.
Yeah, but that would be on a different level then. Or like,
What do you mean different level?
well, okay, like I would call that a different dimensionality, right? Because we're always the swine, right? Like in some way,
Yeah.
but there's ways, right? Like, for example, if I set the frame and I say 1 + 1 equals 2, and you can't agree with me, that's one way of being a swine, right? Like when I say,
Just going to toss it in there that in binary, you can do a 1 and a 1, and you get like what is that, a 1-0? But I think being able to go into someone's frame and then use it is a skill. But I just want to toss that in there. I get the point though.
Abortion is wrong, and you can't agree with me. That's a different way of being a swine, because now there's like way more involved, right? Like it's complex, and it's contingent upon a bunch of assumptions and spirits that you're in, right? And you're not, maybe not aware of, right? So that type of swinery, right, is you have a different type of responsibility towards that. I would argue.
I think it's about the agency responsibility bit. It's like there's some things that as an individual you have less agency regarding it, yeah, and therefore less responsibility. But at that point, it's nice to find help to work as a group for some of these things that where together you can have more agency than you would have as an individual. But yeah, there's a story. I was in a car and I was in the back seat with my father and my stepmother, and there was a car in the intersection that was just not moving, and I was like, "Isn't someone going to go and help that person?" And I looked around, I was like, "Oh, that's going to be me." And so I took off my seatbelt and opened the door, ran over there, and pushed the car. And it's like, yeah. So I remembered that because I was asking myself, what was the most meaningful experience I've had? And it's like it's very meaningful when you can take on responsibility and you have the agency to do it. And for me, it was meaningful because maybe 100 people are looking at this event and not doing anything. I was like, aha, well, one person can do this, and there's no one doing it, and that was very meaningful. But there's some problems where it just takes. It's harder to take on the responsibility because it can even be impossible for one person.
Yeah, I don't. So, I mean, I would kind of like you to help me think through this. So I had
I see some comments. I'm switching tabs here. I'm only on one screen. Let's see. Sherry, be happy about your growth, in which, of course, you can't take anyone with you. And be gentle with those who stay behind. Be confident and calm in front of them, and don't torment them with your doubts, and don't frighten them with your faith or joy, which they wouldn't be able to comprehend. Rilk. Seems pretty good. It's the thing is there's a time and a place and there's a amount that's appropriate. It depends on the context, but it's probably a good rule of thumb. Like the golden rule is a pretty good rule of thumb. Like Jordan Peterson has these rules, and like some rules they're good to get you started. There's some good first steps, and then just like the baby learning to walk, you're gonna benefit from holding a hand sometimes, and you're gonna tumble and fall sometimes. So, but yeah, it's a pretty good rule. And then Fezzi, hello. Glad you're here. Glad you're still breathing air, doing the participatory dance with God. Every breath. I've been trying to find meaning in the breath. It's a pretty good place to ground yourself. When Jordan Peterson talks about like confronting the unknown, if you can ground yourself in your breath, and then find gratitude in the breath and meaning in the breath, like that's powerful.
I would categorize it as a conflict the other day with someone and it was kind of on this point more or less, and it's one of those things that doesn't have resolution. I hate conflict that doesn't have some healthy resolution where it's like I feel like we're moving in the right direction.
That's funny. I remember, it's the same thing with my wife and I. It's like, man, there's a conflict, and I think I vocalized it. I said the reason it is I think it was giving me stress is because I don't know how to solve this problem. So yeah, the conflicts that we have the agency to solve are very meaningful, and then the problems there where we are struggling to figure out the resolution to the problem. That's where people want to ignore them. Um, it just means it requires more work. Maybe it's impossible, or maybe you give up too soon. And I think there's some problems like that where a lot of people give up too soon.
Like conflict that just gets dropped and then just waits to resurface later, where I don't feel like anything's being done. Like both
That's
in
an
my
elephant in the room, by the way.
well, right, and I hate it. Like whether it's in my own family, my family of origin, any of my friendships, like it drives me crazy. I mean, almost quite literally, because I'm a highly emotional type person, and so like I can't compartmentalize that.
So one thing is that so my father, how do you deal with this discomfort? And it's like, you don't want to shy away from it. So like my father would say, pack your food. And then I would forget to pack my food. And then I'd say, I'm hungry. And he'd say, where's your food? And it wasn't there. And it'd be hours later, he'd surprise us with a watermelon. So he told us what to do beforehand. And then he allowed us to experience pain and suffering. And then he had a safety net. And he did, like, that's a pretty good technique, especially, you don't do that with an infant, but as a person matures, you need to see the discomfort as a good teacher. But I do like safety nets. I don't like the permanent damage. So that's why safety nets are cool. But yeah, I don't know the specifics of this situation that Luke's referring to. But yeah, it can be very uncomfortable to have these kind of recurring elephants in the room, so to speak. And it can even be uncomfortable pointing at those elephants as well.
In silence, so it just like sits with me. So I had this conflict with a person, and it was over this topic, because it was which is probably apropos and good that we're having this conversation, because when you disagree with someone, when you see things differently, when communion breaks down, what I often see this in my own conflict, and I try not to do this, but even more broadly, is that exact dynamic happens where this person sees it this way, this person sees it this way. Maybe people are speaking past each other, maybe they're not.
But you have division, right?
Huh?
You have division. So
Yeah.
instead of one vision, right? Because that's what communion is, right?
Yeah.
You organize around one vision, you get division. So you get
Mhm.
now two visions.
I like that. I hadn't heard that one before. It makes sense. I do want to point out, though, like, it's excluding people and pushing them out. Like, I think we have to become people who are okay with being excluded. Like, when I mentioned true, like, real political science, that means having different cities where there is division, and you learn how to do that in a harmonious way so that people can run their experiments and experience pain and suffering, and then report back so that there's lessons learned over time. That's real political science. So yeah, that sometimes I think there's something inside our minds that we've inherited, which wants us to stay united. It doesn't want to break that bond. You develop a bond over time, and when those bonds break, it hurts. Those like attachment. The Buddhist teachings, I think, is related to attachment is like a source of suffering, if not the source of suffering. And so, yeah, we humans with these minds which enslave all of us has been enslaved by our minds. Yeah, we don't like it. We don't like it when we have a breakup, when that connection is broken, when we have division. But just because we don't like it, or just because we like it, doesn't mean that it's good that we actually do the thing we don't like or the thing we like. Sometimes we have to sacrifice our comfort for the future, for a better future. And this is even one of those, this can happen as well.
Hopefully still on the same thing.
Yes.
And so what you need to do is you need to reintegrate how these two visions are part of the same reality, right?
Yeah.
Because if there is division and you can't reintegrate them, you're not looking at the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, yes. And
And that's okay. And it happens. It's unavoidable. And we have to figure out how to handle this situation where there is division. And division is unavoidable. This division is unavoidable. It might actually be the norm. And when you think there is not division, it might just be a hallucination. But we can play games together. We can go play tennis. So when those goals are kind of immediate, we can have less division. But when you talk about like goals that are further out into the future, yeah, you can have more division because some people have better vision than others, and we have different goals.
Right. I see your point. But so at the point where you realize maybe either subconsciously or consciously, because like that's something you're aware of and you can articulate that. So
Yeah, nonstop dancing in God's club. Yeah, that's the breathing, the eating, the drinking, and everything that comes, with creating life. It's good. Sherry, it doesn't imply doing nothing, but being gentle and compassionate, not just with others, but also yourself. Yeah. I guess the thing that I'm pointing at here is that sometimes you can be like gentle and patient, and get abused, right? Your gentleness and your patience can lead to you being abused by people who don't share the same goal. They don't want what's best for you. So, it can go too far. Let's see. Manuel, division is not the norm. That's just perfectionism speaking. We generally participate together towards goals. Even if our understanding differs, we share the vision. That's why you need leaders. Like, I agree. Like, the thing is, when you say things, it's like true and false. It's good and bad. It's like, I can see what you're saying. Like when I'm driving in a car and all of a sudden, and there's all this traffic and nobody's like getting in a car wreck. Like, there's all kinds of things that went into that for it to work. The quality of your tires and everyone's tires and all kinds of things. And it could be better. But yeah, I mean, perfectionism is definitely something that that's always been with me for a long time. And it's not the norm. You're right. Like people that division is uncomfortable, and people will ignore an elephant in the room so that in order to avoid the division, and that's the norm. And I think it has something to do with these minds that we've inherited, that all of us have inherited. We don't, like my experience is, we don't tend to seek out those uncomfortable situations. But yeah, generally, yeah. Like there's overlapping goals. There's some short term, some long term. I was speaking with my neighbor. We talked a little bit about politics, and he had made a claim like at this party with all the neighbors that, these other neighbors and myself could like be leaders in government. And I told him, I said, well, if I was a leader in government, and then you would become aware of all the things that we disagree about. And he says, Nah. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of things we disagree about that we just don't talk about as neighbors. So, yeah, the less like this is the reason people talk about or avoid rigid religion and politics. Would be kind of the norm in my experience. But I know Hazi has, uh, has in. I think he goes to a place or either helps prepare the place where at dinner. I think it's at dinner at the table where he encourages um, people talking about religion and politics and being able to disagree. This is the kind of culture that I think would be healthy, which is absent and which is not normal. Um, like I could repeat that, like, and I'll repeat it by saying, like, when I tell my children no and put my foot down, hopefully for good reason, I do afterward. I try to make sure they understand why, and then I also ask them for how do they think I could have handled the situation better. So I want to encourage them to be someone who can disagree with me. Um, it's not something that I experienced growing up.
You maybe become consciously aware of that in some disagreement, and maybe the other person is or is not, then um then I feel like then is the next moment where it goes into either probably what I would call a posture of openness and humility, or the posture of what I often call the exclusivist religion of the right side of history. Is I think people, I think there can be a tendency for people to say we're looking at the wrong thing, and then and you it's more so you're looking at the wrong thing. You're misunderstanding this correctly. You're not looking at this correctly. And I am, and it's wanting to colonize the other person and get them into your mode of thinking, the right mode of thinking.
Well, can we separate those two, right? Because
Okay.
like, can we first get agreement whether that's actually true or not? That someone can be on the right side of history?
Well, I I so I would say in a static way, like somebody, because of what I said earlier, like you can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right. This is like almost the Vervaekean adverbial versus
No, no,
adjective.
I'm just
Okay.
trying to limit it to the local space, right? Because there's your position, right, or your observation, and then there's what you do with it,
Yeah.
right? And like I want to have those two separate, right? Because like I think you can be on the right side of history with your judgment, right? But you're not the jury and the execution of that judgment, right? So if we're talking about humility or whatever, right? Like you're allowed to make the judgment, and like I would even say that you're obliged to make the judgment because that's giving discernment to other people, right? But then when you've made the judgment, like what are the implications of that? That's a whole different discussion, right? And now we get into law, right? Because that's what law is supposed to deal with, right? Like okay, like we're gonna punish people who speed on the highway. It's like
Yeah.
okay, like maybe, but
Well, so
also that's not interesting to me, right? Like
no.
like it's interesting to me whether you can say that it's bad that people do that, right? Like whether that's actually a judgment that you can make or not.
So tell me if I'm gonna give an example of my own life of what I think you're talking about, and tell me if this is what you mean. So, um,
That was a good technique there, Luke. Good technique. You got to make sure there's some communication happening.
so throughout the entirety of my life, um, I've kind of always been a evolving, growing. I mean, this is the way that I would say it: reading, learning, changing in my own relationship to my Christianity. Right. So, like, I haven't been Orthodox my whole life. I'm Orthodox now. I had a period of being Reformed and Calvinist and whatever. So that's always been changing. I've been reading different things, and so throughout a lot of that, my mother is probably the most uh, well, she's the most interested in thinking and talking about and interacting with about her faith. But throughout a lot of that, I've with so much change and so much discussion, my mother and I have had a lot of conversations and disagreements about this whole journey, my whole journey with this stuff. And something that would always come up with my mom is we, when I would say that I was less mature than I am now, hopefully, God willing, and or may that be true, we would get into disagreements and and we'd have this thing where it'd be like, well, you just think your opinions are correct, and then it's just like the retort is like, well, you just think your opinions are correct, and I'm like, of course, like that's what you're just saying, making the judgment. Like you have to make the judgment, you have to say
Well,
what you're thinking. Is that what you're talking about?
well, no, because like this puts me back into Plato Book 5 actually, because
Mm,
they're talking about truth, right? And or knowing, right, which would be true, right? Knowledge is true, right? And the truth of the knowledge is as a consequence of that it accords to being, right? So if I'm in accordance with being, I get a participatory knowledge of what it's like to be like that, right? Whatever that means, right? Because I can't put words on that, like it's not
mhm,
articulatable, right? But that's, I inherit the authority of being, right? Through being true to it, right? Like I'm in a faithful relationship to being. And now I can say something that's real, right? Like I can use that authority to make statements in the world, right? And then there's the realm of opinion, right? And the realm of opinion isn't in relationship to being, right? Like opinion is in relationship to impressions, right? Like if you would put it in the cave analogy, right? Like you have an opinion about the shadows on the wall, right? But the shadows on the wall are not reality, right? They're images of what is real. So there's a distinction between opinions, right? Like when you do something, right, and it upsets me, right? I have a negative opinion about what you did, but that doesn't make it bad or evil or anything. That just makes it that I'm affected in a negative way. So I'm,
you're just saying opinion is just like, I don't like that.
yes, effectively, it's a aesthetic judgment.
So I suppose where I
Interesting. So, an opinion has something to do with an aesthetic judgment about what it is like, which is different than like knowledge about, I forget the word he used, but it's associated with commensurate with being. Commensurate's a fancy word there. Those, yeah, what do all those words mean? I have an idea of what they mean. Like being for me means, it's like I was talking about earlier about breathing, like the the ecosystem and that all of the, so you have the whole world that you can study, uh, like inward and outward, with microscopes and telescopes, and then you have something about knowledge, through these observations. Then there's this new, and we've done that with the tools like microscopes and telescopes. Now there's this new area. We're on the cusp of developing new technologies, like I mentioned, mind reading instruments and real political science, where we get to explore inward and outward the mind, and the mind has something to do with like this mind that we have within us, and there's an inward look a mind reading instrument could look at, and then there's the mind that we were born into. That's this outward thing, like maybe culture, and real political science could help you look at that. Opinion. Yeah, this is a lot of this is just trying to learn other people's definitions. But yeah, preferences and what you like. It's very, I think that's that's connected for sure. I'm imagining the mind reading instrument going in and looking at my mind and trying to figure out what an opinion is. It's like, I like pizza. And yeah, something like that. There's a skill, when you have the mind reading instrument, there's a skill, reconsideration, the ability to reconsider, the ability to learn and change the mind. Different people have different skill level. I'm interested in using the mind reading instrument to be able to, watch our own minds and do that at scale as well, to be able to develop standards. It's going to change things, a lot of things. When the tech is here now. Center for Humane Technology released their video in March about artificial intelligence, and in one small part of it, they showed the fMRI imaging combined with artificial intelligence translation in order to do mind reading. It was eye-opening.
Where I would maybe differ in that framing would be, I think the only place where we get this truth where you are in a
Let me see, Manuel. Being, is that what allows things to exist? It's what really participates. It's what reality participates in while manifesting the future. Being is not reducible. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm fine with that definition. I mean, you're using being, uppercase B. I could use the word God, uppercase G. It's I think, there's a bunch of words you can use, but yeah, I get it. And there's we could go into that. You start using your instruments, your microscopes and your telescopes, and people specialize and focus on one part of it. And if you want to actually understand being, you would need to generalize instead of specialize. But you get glimpses. I think it is kind of fractal. Yeah, I think it is fractal. But you start noticing that as you generalize, that there are these fractal patterns throughout all of existence. So you would have to, if you specialize, you would need to begin, be a master of a trade and then a jack of many, to be able to understand God and understand being. Let's see. I think there's a disagreement. No, you cannot use God because God is bigger. You could get close with the logos, but I think the logos is even bigger. That's fine. The thing is we're in it, right? So I don't know I like to wonder what the belief does to you. I know the beliefs are powerful. So, but if I equate being with God, how does that impact me? As opposed to saying that God is bigger than being, I don't know how that impacts my life. Is it an elephant in the room that's going to have an impact on my life? I'm not. Yeah, I don't understand how it would matter, how it would be relevant. You can spend a lot of time arguing about it, and there could be disagreement. But would my being wrong about equating God with being, to use your language, would that? Would that somehow prevent me from reaching my full potential? Yeah, I like to ask those kinds of questions. What's the impact of the belief upon the people who believe it? And I'm definitely not going to get through all of this in one sitting because I will need to go probably in about 30 minutes at least. But there will be more for others to go actually to the video and watch it. Yeah, if I covered it all here. All right. I'm a little uncomfortable. I need to go use the restroom. let's see. There we go. If you stop trying to do philosophy, probably not. Yeah, I have stopped trying to do philosophy. Well, depends on what you mean by philosophy. Philosophy, love of wisdom, love of knowledge. Like, but God is the source of things. So yeah, don't reduce that what is to its author. Yeah, I think there's other language for that, like pantheism and panentheism, right? I think those are the fancy words that we're talking about here. You know, is it a pantheistic God or panentheistic God? But it still goes back to that idea there of fractals. So if being is fractal, yeah, the being is more than anything you study. And when you specialize in a science, for example, or you specialize in a trade, because I think you can specialize in all kinds of things. Dancing, you can specialize in music, specialize anywhere, become a master of anything, and you will you will actually have to learn about being, and then as you generalize and become jacks of trades in other places, you might begin to see that there are these patterns everywhere, and so it could be that being is also a fractal of God. So, but ultimately, I do think God is ineffable. So, but yeah, it does seem like it's fractal as well. Don't reduce that what is its author. I'll try to be careful with that.
Accord with being that differs from opinion that is universally applicable to all people would be a truth place. I think the only place where we get this truth where you are in accord with being that differs from opinion that is universally applicable to all people would be in
I was just imagining being in a Honda Accord with this person named Being, but so I'll have to rewind it again. My mind does these things. I apologize.
Where in that framing would be the only place where we get this truth where you are in accord with being that differs from opinion that is universally applicable to all people would be in the highest
True revelation.
But the highest way to say that would be love, and then down to the fruit of the spirit, against which things there is no law. The problem, the difficulty I often have is like you can't then wield that truth to someone else and tell them what that means for them and how they need to live.
I'm just thinking of the breath, like every breath, and we can ignore it too. It's like we are participating with being when we breathe, and we do it. And it happened. The mind, which we're all slaves to one degree or another, is like doing it for us. This is an amazing miracle. And it becomes very uncomfortable if I don't take a breath. I did this in one of my recordings the other day where I just keep on putting air out of my lungs and not take a breath. And it's not natural, and it becomes very uncomfortable. And people don't like being uncomfortable, and I can keep going until it's very empty in the breath.
Because then it becomes this colonizing thing that's power and no longer authority.
I agree that you can't wield it as a tool, but you can wield it as a shield or whatever, or as a mirror, or like.
Or you can say what you think, and then it would be like a mirror,
No.
I suppose.
So what Manuel said there. So we have these minds that enslave us. Like we're born with these minds to various degrees are enslaving us, but we can learn to make it he mentioned the word tool. We can make it a good servant. There's a song where it has some words from Alan Watts, and he says, "The mind is a good servant and a bad master." And that's not necessarily true. But it is true and false. It's like, yes, the mind's doing these things with the heart and the lungs and all kinds of amazing things. But we don't want it to just be our master, where we just do whatever the mind, pushes and pulls us to do. So yeah, the idea of making it a tool. We want it to be a good servant.
No.
No.
No, like there's no. Like what do you think Jesus did?
I think Jesus
couldn't save the people from his town, right? And why couldn't he save them? Not because he didn't have the authority or whatever, right? Like, because he had, right? Because he'd been granted the authority. But the reason that he couldn't save them is because they didn't believe. And why didn't they believe? Because they saw the kid that they grew up with. They didn't see him as the Son of God. They saw him as what their historical interpretation of him. And so he couldn't get into right relationship, right? So they couldn't cooperate with him.
What's interesting is, like, can you see me as the Son of God? It's like, so Emmanuel mentioned authority, being in accord with being and speaking with authority. And it's like, I think that's what can happen, what's available to us. It may be through the process of theosis. But yeah, people, these minds which enslave us will hesitate, because it's actually very uncomfortable to be in the presence of a saint, who walks with God, and like, it's going to make you ashamed of your shortcomings, and you have to not shy away from that discomfort, such that you can learn from people. You can learn from saints. You can learn from those who are the best at walking with God. And I'm not claiming to be the best. I do think the mind reading instrument will help us to identify those who are the best. But Seal of God trademark.
Right? They could.
Let me check on comments real quick. No comments.
They couldn't have a faithful relationship, right? So then they couldn't inherit his authority, right? Like he couldn't affect them because they wouldn't let him. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have the authority, and like he should not have spoken there. Like he still should have spoken. He still should have given them the chance to redeem themselves effectively, right? To get in right relationship with truth and being alive, right? And that they chose to look another way for whatever reason that they made up in their head.
So the only thing I'd put in here, Manuel, is that they were slaves to their minds, and this is the norm. And so the agency we have can increase over time, as we learn to make the mind a good servant. We practice, we develop skills, we become a master of something and a jack of many trades. And so our agency can increase. And so the people who rejected Jesus, I think they were the ones who were enslaved to a mind. And then I'm remembering about Luke talking, trying to define relation. And he had alluded to like past experience and time and energy, because Manuel's pointing out how these people had the past experiences of Jesus, the little kid, or as Manuel called it, the kid. But I like picking. Hopefully that didn't bother you. But I don't think it does, Manuel. But yeah, and I've experienced this. We can be the kind of person who does not consider and does not reconsider. Like, we develop a model of people in our minds, and if we are slaves to our minds, then that model carries a lot of weight. And so if we aren't able to reconsider, which basically means we're not able to forgive, if we're not able to reconsider, because we have not learned how to make the mind a good servant, a good tool, that's what happens. And that's most people on earth still today. So it's the way it is. And I don't think we can just blame people, because there is limited agency throughout history, recorded and even a large amount of non-recorded history. It's just a lot of, there's very little agency there, which is amazing. Like, I don't have to control my lungs and my heart. I don't want to be responsible for that. So let's see, Manuel. Okay, but how did Jesus cast out demons that enslaved people? How are those different? I mean, the difference here, Manuel, is I don't look at the Bible the same way that you do. So, like, I don't have to answer that. But have I cast out? I've never converted anyone. Like, I imagine that there's some. I mean, I can come up with all kinds of stories for how it might have happened, but I haven't had success casting out demons. Yeah, and I'm definitely can be wrong. But how did Jesus cast out demons that enslaved people? Interesting question. Like, I have encountered, spiritual forces. Like, so I mean, I know that's real. And I don't know how to cast out demons. I wish I knew. So, greetings to all from Netherlands.
Yeah. Well, and I think Jesus, though, too, was like he was being, I assume he's being fairly selective or discerning of when he speaks, when he doesn't speak, what he says, and how he
Yeah,
says
because he
it.
can see people's hearts, right?
Yes.
So he has
And,
perfect awareness in how to affect people, and he
and so,
couldn't, right?
yeah,
So like,
so that's kind of the problem. Or that's the difficulty I think that it is, at least for me, is somewhat, and this is why I like to talk about honesty a lot. At least for me, within myself, is I I am, and this is kind of back to the disagreement that I had with the person the other time, is I'm very often a person that's full of self-doubt. And so, like, if I have a disagreement with someone about something, I do have my, I don't know what you'd say about that. I have my thoughts about the truth that I see. And then, but uh, I'm also very aware that I may be deluded and the other person may be right, because that's happened in my life. I've had lots of conviction about certain topics, and thought that I was standing on the side of truth and proper authority, and that hasn't been the case. And very often I can interact
Me too, Luke. Me too.
with people. I would say our culture is broadly people who are not very open to that side of the thing. They're
I
not
I
very,
I agree, but like I want to get a couple things straight, right? So if you have a drug user and they're like, I'm I'm gonna I'm gonna shoot up some drugs right now, like you have the obligation to say like don't do that. That's not good, right? Like you don't have the obligation to physically restrain them and prevent them from doing it. Like
That's an interesting take. And it sounds good. Sounds pretty good. It's a good approach. I have physically restrained people, or at least one person. There's one person on more than one occasion. So I have physically restrained people.
But you need to provide them with the chance for redemption, right? Like you saying that the first like the 100th time that you say that, like it might actually land, right? Like there might actually at that day, for whatever miraculous reason, be the soil that seed lands.
Yes.
Manuel. Yeah, but if they were controlled by demons, then he'd obviously cast them out. That's what he's been doing all along. So something else is going on. So you believe Jesus cast out demons. I don't believe that. But I do believe that people can walk with God and be in accord with being, and so Jesus. I believe there could be a Jesus character that did this, and Moses, for example, could be a character who did this. So I believe that. But yeah, but you accept some things as true that I don't accept as true as the whole thing. But I know there's interesting stories about demons and casting out demons. I don't necessarily want to encounter demons, and I don't necessarily, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to cast them out. But if that's what God has in store, then that'll happen, I guess. But I would prefer to avoid that. Hello, Tayo. See, I really enjoy Manuel. I don't know if you've heard me say it yet, but I've listened to you speak with Paul and Tayo, and you did really well. And I think you have a gift. I really do. Let's see, Manuel, your belief is not relevant. It's in the story, and there is a change in how he goes about things. You don't have to believe it's true. Yeah. I guess you guys were talking about delusions, like in elephants and things like that. And so what happens when people act like top lobsters, and I mentioned this to Andrew earlier, when people act like top lobsters instead of being a top lobster, they'll do things like, and they can do good. It'll be good for them and for people around them, but they can end up creating moats and traps around them to preserve their power and influence. There's a difference between like a dominance hierarchy and a competence hierarchy. So yeah, I mean, I can't get. Yeah, I do wonder if. Yeah. Thanks for the compliment. Yeah, I think I like what you're doing, Manuel. You have good listening skills and are very smart. And that's one of my weaknesses is listening. I try to get better at it. My mind just does weird things. I have different strengths and weaknesses than other people, but I become overwhelmed by a large amount of information. You could have even seen it on display here. But yeah, I worry that it's not even a worry, but I think that the belief I lean into is that the one that makes the most sense is that people encourage kinds of beliefs that people in power encourage the kinds of beliefs which will attempt to allow them to maintain their power. And so the people who are acting like top lobsters, they become too defensive, and they aren't actually looking for the lobsters that they should be like lifting up above them to become the top, who are the real top lobsters that they could lift up. But instead, like people who pretend to be top lobsters can exclude them, and they can do things by encouraging people to. They can shape people's vision through beliefs and stories, such that people are blinded to the elephant, the important elephant. So that's the reason I have a lot of caution with text and content created by people, because I don't trust it. I don't trust the people. Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
Now, to push back a little bit and to make it very practical, like with my own children, very often I'm at the place, at least in my parenting, my kids are, teenage years, basically early teens, early mid-teens, and very often what I find with my wife and our interactions with them is, I think as parents, we have probably been prone to, uh, and especially, I mean, you see these generational differences. We've been prone to probably lean into talking a lot with our kids through all this and understanding things and having discussions with our kids. Where we often are with our kids and in conversations is we get into, I've noticed that we have cultivated and fostered children who like to argue a lot.
Yep. Because you
Um,
give them the option, right?
True, but part of that I think is the medium that we have cultivated has been talking about things a lot, and so where I'm kind of moving in my parenting is, uh, I often have the impulse to say something because that was the way that I was raised, either in a, you know, like I mean, it's not like the kids are drug addicts, but like let's say they're wanting to watch screens and wanting to justify it, or wanting to
They're
eat a
little
bunch,
rebels. That's
or
what they
right,
are.
or wanting to eat a bunch of crap they shouldn't eat, and I come in to, right, to be like, don't shoot up that black tar heroin, son.
Yes. Lay down the law. Yes.
You know. However, like, he knows what I think. I don't need to tell him what I think. I've told him
No, you do.
this is why, like, I've told you a
No,
thousand
I
times.
think you do. Like,
But here's where I would say as a parent, I think sometimes you can be damned if you do and damned if you don't. Sometimes I think you're going to create a bigger problem with your verbal intervention than if you didn't say anything.
right. I agree that.
And I am going to have to end soon, and I'm going to let Manuel finish it off. But this, the parenting stuff is difficult. I know that each child is different. Each person is different. It's strange how that happens. With my oldest, he got his hands on so much sugar and then he threw up. Right, he learned his lesson through throwing up, experiencing some discomfort, some pain, some suffering. And then another child will just eat. If you let her eat as much sugar as she wants, she will. And so there's different techniques for each person. The same. We can't treat every person the same way. But I'm going to let Manuel finish, and then I'm going to turn it off. And thank you for your time and attention. And I will finish watching this without the commentary, and I encourage you to go as well. So let's let Manuel. Let's see what Manuel has to say about this parenting. Parenting is important, people. Very important. It might be like at the foundation, most important thing.
that potential is there. And actually, Van der Clay pointed that out to me, right? Like, but that ends up in fatalism because now, right? Like, and I'm not saying that you can never make that discernment, right? Like, there's definitely cases where like you should just hold your mouth, right? So when there's high emotions, right? Like piling up that one, like the straw that breaks the camel's back, bad. Like
Yeah.
don't break the camel's back, right? So I agree.
A lot of proverbs about that, actually. Keeping your mouth closed.
So there is wisdom in what you say, right? But there's also how you say it, right? Like when you say something from a place of authority, right? Like the way I think of it is that there's a bunch of affordances within the other person, right? So there's hooks that you can hook into and make an appeal to them, right? And the most easy hooks are emotional, right? But when you're doing an emotional appeal, that's like functional, right? So if I do an emotional appeal on you, like, oh, I feel bad because you haven't done the dishes, right? That's not going to change you, right? Like, it's not going to teach you how to fish, right? Like, it's not going to make you a person that will do the dishes from now on. It will maybe make you the dishes to do the dishes right now, right? So this manipulation, and you're also borrowing from from the relationship, right?
Borrowing. Okay.
Right, like, because there's goodwill on your side, right? And I'm withdrawing from the bank of goodwill, and if I keep doing that, I destroy the relationship, right? Like, I can't make that emotional appeal all the time, because then it's blackmail, right?
Yeah.
Like, it so that, like, this is why I don't like emotional anything. 'Cause, like, I don't think it leads anywhere good, and it's the tool of the ego, right? Like you said, you can wield it, right? Like, you get to wield something that isn't yours, and it's like, that's necessary sometimes. I agree, but not good. Like, it's not good.
So
And I'll read this. Manuel, if you take power as primary motivation of people, you end up with misalignment. People are self-preserving, protecting the devil they know. Power is a goal of a select few people you should avoid. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is just connected to standing up straight with your shoulders back, acting like a top lobster. It's very powerful. I can smile. I can smile, and it does something to me and to others. And I can frown, and it does something to me and others. Yeah, and I agree. I'm not saying that it's the primary motivation of people. Yeah. And Jordan Peterson is recommending that you this, I guess this is why Jordan Peterson can offer this up as a step. But Manuel gets the last word. If you take power as a primary motivation of people, you end up with misalignment. People are self-preserving, protecting the devil they know. Power is a goal of a select few people you should avoid. All right. Y'all have a good one. I enjoyed that. I'm going to continue listening. And I hope y'all have a good one. Bye-bye.